stop
Really
talking. Yeah,
really laid back, huh?
yeah.
I see. Yeah, I'm glad to see you again, and thanks so much for doing this. And it's as I told you yesterday when we did the sound check, I mentioned that I used to listen a lot to Jerry Mulligan, Art Farmer, and that you
Uh-huh.
were the bass player there. And you mentioned you guys came to Zurich. Maybe we can jump in right there somewhere if you
Oh,
don't
that was
mind.
our when I first joined Jerry. It was a sextet with Zoot Sims and Bob Brookmeyer and John Erdley and
Mhm.
Dave Bailey and me. And we did a European tour, which included Zurich.
So you remember the place you played the gig?
No, it's been so long ago.
Mm.
I remember the lake.
Yeah, that's not
We
bad
were,
either.
we rented bicycles. I still have a picture of Bob and Zoot with their bikes.
Nice. But Dave Bailey was also the drummer when you did the piano less uh, group, right?
Well, the sextet was pianist too.
Uh,
Uh, but then when we became a quartet, Dave was the drummer for quite a while.
mm,
And then when Jerry made the big band, Mel Lewis was the drummer.
great.
And then when we went back to a quartet, neither Dave or Mel were available, so we got Gus Johnson. He
Mm,
stayed with us for about a year.
mm. I just read you started playing the trumpet and drums when you were a kid, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It
In
didn't
the
last
fourth
too
grade.
long, or fourth grade. Huh?
Well, I started in the fourth grade. My mother tried to teach me piano before that, but
Mm,
I couldn't get my hands separated. But in the fourth grade, we had a very nice music teacher, and he started me out on the trumpet. And in the sixth grade, I complained to him that I hadn't developed enough lip to play the first parts yet. I wanted to play the melody.
mm,
And he said, well, maybe you need an instrument with a bigger mouthpiece. And he gave me the school's baritone horn. And that I really fell in love with that horn. I had a nice time playing it. And when I got an after school job in high school, I got a horn of my own, a very nice King. And I played that right through high school in the Army. And then a cornet player that I was playing with in the Army said, you know, the baritone's not really a jazz instrument. Nobody plays that. Why don't you get a valve trombone? It's the same fingering.
mm.
And so I did. And that was what I came to New York playing in 1950.
And later you exchanged that for a tuba, isn't that right?
Well, I played the sousaphone a little bit
So-
just a short time that I was in college,
mm,
but when I took up the bass, I didn't play a brass instrument for about 20 years until
mm,
I started doing theater work, and they asked if I could double on the tuba,
mm,
and so I got one and made a little extra money that way.
mm. So at that time when I read that you were self-taught in the beginning on the bass,
Yeah, yeah.
on the upright. You
Well,
felt the need, you
I
felt
was
the
on a
need for bass players then, or
I was on a summer job as a trombone player,
hmm
and my friend had hired me, and it was a job where the owner of the hotel wouldn't let him hire a bass player, so he just went out and rented one from some kid that didn't need it during the summer,
hmm
and he said, anytime that you're not playing the trombone, you got to try to play this bass because I can't stand playing without a bass player. So I knew what the bass notes were. I'd been a record collector for a long time, and I knew what jazz bass lines were doing, but I
hmm
just had to find out where the notes were on the bass.
hmm
By the end of the summer, I could come back to New York and offer myself as a bass player, and I was getting more work doing that than trombone work. So I just stayed with the bass.
And that actually opened you all the doors. Was it the instrument, or was it you as a character among those people at that time? Or
Well, it was funny. There was a lot of action in New York at that time, 1950.
hmm
Lots of jam sessions and lots of casual jobs where they would just need somebody for one night or something like that.
Mm.
And every job was another lesson. I would get hired because they liked something about what I could already do. And when I would get there, I'd find they expected me to do things that I hadn't learned yet. So I would have to hurry up and learn them or lose the job.
Mm. And I mean, among all those famous cats you played with, was that work in progress, or you played with a lot of people that maybe I might never heard of?
Well, when I was there was a bar in Midtown called Charlie's Tavern
Hmm.
where a lot of the musicians hung out. And I would just go stand there and try to meet people. And if I'd hear there was a jam session somewhere, I would go there. And quite often there would just be one rhythm section and a whole bunch of horn players. So the bass player might get tired and let me play.
Hmm.
And then eventually I found a guy that was willing to sell me a bass, and I had one of my own then. And I started rehearsing every day with Teddy Charles. He had a trio, and his bass player had just left for a job. He wasn't getting much work, but he liked to rehearse every day. So that was like going to school. I learned all my bebop tunes from Teddy and all my monk tunes and all that. And it was there was no drummer, so it was up to me to keep the rhythm strong. And then our guitar player got a job, and Jimmy Rainey came with us for a little while. He'd been working with Stan Getz, but Stan had gone to California for the summer, so Jimmy was available, and he played with us.
Hmm.
Then when Stan came back, he called Jimmy and said he had a job in Boston for a week and to get a bass player and come on up. So that was how I got to play with a major player. And I thought it was just going to be 1 week, but it lasted about 6 months, I guess.
Hmm.
Went through several different, and guys kept coming and going. The first drummer was Roy Haynes because he was living in Boston then. And then when we came back to New York, it was Frank Isola for a while, and then Kenny Clark for a while, and then Al Levitt for a while. And Jimmy Rainey left to do a steady job in Manhattan, and Bob Brookmeyer came with us. And then Stan decided to go back to Teddy Kotick, who had been his bass player before. And so I found out that Teddy was leaving Claude Thornhill's band in order to take Stan's job. So I went and took the bass chair with Claude Thornhill's band for the summer of 1953. And that was a good lesson too. There were hard things there that I had to learn how to play.
Hmm. How was that to play with Stan? Was it someone that you used to listen to or see from afar?
Oh, sure. I've been collecting his records. I knew most of his music.
Mm-hmm. But he just, I mean, was it rough, or you were like you could do whatever you wanted and somehow
Well,
experiments, or?
they didn't ask me to do anything except just play good time. I wasn't expected to be a soloist. They had plenty of soloists there, and once in a while they'd give me a little solo, but I was still learning to play the instrument. It wasn't until I played my first steady job in New York was with the Marion McPartland Trio at the Hickory House.
Okay.
And Joe Morello was the drummer. And Marion loved to play in all keys, and so I really had to find the notes in all those different keys, find the scales. And then I went with Mulligan's Sextet, and I found out that he had written things in the upper register that I didn't know how to find. I could play up to those notes, but if I had to go directly to them, I didn't know how to be accurate with the pitch. So I had not talked to any bass player that said he was studying, except Trigger Alpert. He was over at CBS, and I mentioned it to him.
Okay.
And he said that he was studying and gave me the name of his teacher was Fred Zimmerman, who was the principal bassist at the New York Philharmonic at that time, and he was teaching a lot. So he had an apartment and a studio on 55th Street, I think it was, and so whenever I was traveling by then, in and out of town with Mulligan, and so anytime I was back in New York, I go take another lesson from Fred, and
It was
he,
about what? About the resonance of the bass, the bow, and the fingerings?
well, when I walked in the first time, he said, "Well, take out your bow and play me something." And I said, "Fred, I own a bow, but I only use it for the last note. I'm a pizzicato player." And he says, "Oh, and you're working." He says, "That's interesting." So he opened the Simandl book to page 1, and he said, "We'll start here, and when we come to something you already know, it'll go faster. But that
Is
way
this
we
the
can
classical bass Bible, this book, or what?
Yeah."
What is
And
called? Solomon?
Simandl, Simandl, was the
Simon.
man that wrote the book.
Okay.
And actually, Fred was one of his students.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found out that there was a fingering system. I didn't know that up until then, and a bowing system, and so he was very helpful. I made a lot of progress with him.
That's nice. It's also nice and interesting to hear that even though you were in like there is a demand for bass players in a band, obviously every band usually needs a bass player. You were quite active going to jam sessions still back in the 50s, you mentioned, right?
Oh, I was looking for any chance to play.
Yeah, you were not sitting at the house waiting for the phone to ring, so you were actually out there. Yeah, that's great. And another very interesting, well, I'm very curious to find out about is in 62 when you did the Benny Goodman tour to the Soviet Union. Maybe you can take us through that trip a little bit.
Well, I wrote a long article about that trip, and it's on my website if you want to read it.
Yeah,
my website is billcrowbass.com.
It's every word is there, you say.
Yeah, I really.
Pretty much.
Gene Lees was the one that got me busy writing on that. He called me up about, it must have been 10 years after the tour, and said, nobody ever really wrote the whole story about that tour. Why don't you do it? He had a little publication called the Jazz Letter then that people subscribed to, and it was his writing mostly, but he put other people's writing in there too. And so I said, "Well, how long would you like it?" And he said, "Just as long as it takes." So I sat down and really wrote the whole story, and he published it in about 6 different issues of his Jazz Letter.
So you're tired of hearing it, or you can take us through in a nutshell what was the essence of it?
Oh, well,
something you
remember. We were all the younger generation that had grown up listening to Benny Goodman's music, and we came ready to play for him. We were all good players, and John Bunch, I guess, had helped Benny put this band together. He hadn't had a band for a year or so, and he liked the way Mel Lewis and I played together on Jerry Mulligan's big band. And he chose, the trumpet section was John Frost, Jimmy Maxwell, Joe Wilder, and Joe Newman. And the trombones were Jimmy Knepper, Willie Dennis, and Wayne Andre. And saxophones were Phil Woods, Jerry Dodgen, Tommy Mitchell, Zoot Sims, and Gene Allen. And we had 2 piano players, John Bunch and Teddy Wilson, and Georgia Sherrill was the singer.
What a band.
So it was a good band, and we had several rehearsals because he was having a lot of new music written. Johnny Carisi wrote something for us, and Brookmeyer wrote something, and several different arrangers. So we rehearsed all this new material, and then as a break-in, we went out and played a week in at the Seattle World's Fair. And by the time the week was over, Benny had started going back into his old book because he was uncomfortable playing the new music. It meant he had to have the music on a music stand, you know, and he didn't want to be seen having to read his parts. So he played the music that he knew, and that was okay with us. We kind of missed playing. Well, John Bunch wrote a couple of new tunes, and I'm forgetting people's names now. The tenor player wrote a couple of things that Benny liked, so we played those. And but by the time we got back to actually going to the Soviet Union, Benny had already started to be kind of tough to deal with. You know, he would get cranky. When we got over there, he didn't want to stay at the same hotel that the band stayed at, and the Russians told him he had to, so he insisted at least on staying on a different floor. we didn't know why that was. He was really only interested in himself and his clarinet. He had his family with him. He had his wife and 2 daughters were traveling with him, and.
But those gigs were showcasing him as the king of swing, or you guys could play a solo somewhere?
Well, we had an opening number that introduced everybody. So everybody got to play like 8 bars by himself, and then the band would play with him, you know. And then the featured soloists were Zoot and Phil, and Joe Wilder and Joe Newman. We would Victor Feldman was there. He was also the vibes player, and so we used to play a little number just with the trio, Mel and Victor and me. Part of the show was kind of the history of jazz, you know, and part of it was a couple of new charts that Benny liked to play. We got along all right, except the
payment.
Well, we had to argue with him about that. You know, we were going to be away for 6 weeks at least, and they were going to wait and pay us after we got back, and we kept saying, "Look, we got families, you know, that need some cash." So we finally worked out an agreement where they would send some money to our wives as well as paying us on the road. And then there was some. Well, see, Benny was chosen to be the first one to go to the Soviet Union because they were afraid of jazz a little bit. They had heard about the rock and roll riots in Newport, and they didn't know anything about the difference between jazz and rock and roll, and they were afraid that we would cause the audience to go into a frenzy and be disruptive, you know. So since Benny had a reputation of also playing classical music, they felt that was a little safer. So they accepted Benny, and he was going to play a major concerto with the Moscow Philharmonic.
I see.
And they hadn't decided. It was down to a choice of the Ravel or the I don't know, Tchaikovsky, or it was like three different composers. And Benny kept. I think he was a little nervous about it, and he kept postponing the rehearsals, and finally the Philharmonic felt when we left Moscow without him either meeting them or rehearsing with them, and went to Sochi, which is our second week there, And so they sent us a message that they decided to cancel his performance with them. And that caused the State Department to get into a big fuss. And they finally arranged that when we got to Leningrad, since Byron Janis was going to be there playing a concert, they would ask him to stay and play Rhapsody in Blue with us. And that turned out to be a travesty because instead of rehearsing it properly, Benny went fishing. So it was probably the worst performance that Byron Janis ever made. Mainly just because Benny wouldn't conduct the tempo changes. You know, he was just playing the clarinet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it was quite an
But
adventure.
it was a great adventure, and I love, you know, I'm a tourist. So each city that we came to, we went from Moscow to Sochi, and then to Tbilisi, and then to Tashkent, and then to Leningrad, and then to Kiev, and back to Moscow. And in each of those places, I had a wonderful time just exploring, you know. So it was funny. I had a secondhand camera, a movie camera that I had bought, and it was so old that it used magazines for the film, where all of the newer cameras that everyone else had used roll film.
Okay.
So the Russians felt that those magazines were an indication that I had some special spy equipment.
I'm sure you
So,
did.
well, you know, I didn't take pictures. They asked us not to take pictures of certain things, you know, bridges and military bases and things like that. But I just wanted the scenery, you know, and some of the people on the street and some of the houses and that sort of thing. And so I had about 5 or 6 magazines of film in my suitcase, which they confiscated as we left, saying that they would develop them and look at them, and if it was all right, they'd send them back to me. Well, I knew that wasn't going to happen because this was Kodak film, and they were using the AGFA system, and they ended up ruining all the film trying to develop it.
Oh no.
So, and also, my dad had a collection. He was a hobbyist in geology. When I was in college, I had left the book from my geology class in my room when I left home, and he read it and got interested in rocks and minerals and things, and he had a collection of sand samples that he liked to look at under the microscope. So I used to save the film canisters that the life photographer was throwing away, and I would save a little sample of sand in each one from different places that we were, and I'd put a little note in each one saying, this is from the flower beds at the Kremlin, or this is from the beach at Kiev, or this is from Leningrad harbor, you know. So as we're leaving, they bring my suitcase into the office of the guys that's in charge there at the airport, and he has all my film and all these little canisters on his desk, you know, and says, please explain. So I did.
Powder.
I explained like I just told you, and he looked at me like, what kind of a fool do you think I am, you know? So he confiscated all my sand samples. And about 10 years later, when Mel Lewis took his band over there, one of the guys that had been an interpreter for us was now in charge of the traveling entertainment that was coming in from the West. And he told Mel to tell me that he had tried very hard to get my film, but they had ruined all of it. And he said, and one of the sand samples that I had taken from the beach at Sochi turned out to have a little radioactivity in it, and said they said they hadn't discovered this before. And he was telling them, you should be giving this man a medal instead of ruining his film. So, but that was the funny thing was when I was on the Staten Island ferry once years ago, I had found a little Minox camera that somebody had lost, and I
Mhm.
never found out anybody that belonged to it, so I just kept it. And that was the original spy camera. You know, it had a really miniature film, and it was a tiny little camera, and that was in my base case all along. They never searched that.
During the whole trip.
And so and I didn't take many pictures with it because I was
Mhm.
busy with my movie camera. So, but they would have really thought I was the spy if they had found that.
Mhm. And you guys traveled all over Russia? I mean, from the left to the
Yeah,
right side, or?
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
We got clear into Uzbekistan,
Mhm.
and every place that we went, we met the local musicians, and some of them we got a chance to play with. We go out to restaurants at night and play, and uh, I met a couple of guys that said that they were in kind of there were musicians there, but they weren't associated with any organized musical group.
Mhm.
So they had trouble getting supplies because there were no music stores. They had to,
Mhm.
like the bass player that I met that was playing in the park said that he was using used harp strings on his bass. He couldn't find any bass strings.
Mm, I see, understand.
And oh, we met a saxophone player in Tbilisi that showed Phil Woods his saxophone and said, and I carved that mouthpiece myself out of a block of wood. And Phil looked at it and he just shook hands with the guy. And said, "I don't know how you do it, you
Mm.
know." But there was a very good trumpet player, Konstantin Nosov,
Okay.
in Leningrad, I think that was, that we played with,
Mhm.
and Gennady Goldstein, the good alto player.
Yeah, in Leningrad, right?
Yes.
Mhm. Mhm. And was Benny spontaneous by inviting someone and jamming along, or he was off after the concert?
No, the jam sessions, he really usually wasn't there.
Uh-huh. I see.
We had one. Let's see, I'm forgetting which city this was now. It was one of the. This might have been in Tbilisi. One of the Russian dance groups invited us over to their. They had a building and a dance a theater, you know, and
Mhm.
they gave a performance just for the band. It was and one afternoon. It was very nice of them, and
Mhm.
it was a spectacular performance. And so then the life photographer and the time photographer were there, and Benny was very interested in the publicity. He wanted to be in the pictures, you know. So he promoted a jam session after their performance. And when they came down from their dressing rooms in their street clothes, he was saying, "Oh no, I wanted you in costume," you know. And he was
Mhm.
ready to send them back to put on their costumes and makeup for the photographs. But Mel Lewis and I complained and said he was being discourteous to them, you know.
Mhm.
And we played a few tunes, and then Mel and I left because
The
we didn't
groove.
like the way it was going.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that was the only time that Benny played with us. Most of the times we just played.
Mhm.
In Leningrad, we had a late evening after our concert. They came and got us in a taxi and took us out to the university, and they had an address that we couldn't find. The taxi driver couldn't find it. Turned out it was a number on the inside of a building quad, and but the Russian guy that was with us said, "Oh, he said there's a policeman coming over to see what's up with us." And he said, "Don't anybody say anything, or as soon as he hears you speaking English, he'll want to take you down to the police station because it won't be something he can handle personally, you know."
Mhm.
And we'll never get to the jam session. So he solved the address problem, and then we went in and played. But we had to be sure to get out of there by 12, I think it was, because they they leave the drawbridges open and go away
Right.
at
Mhm.
night, and
You're
so
stuck. Yeah.
we wouldn't have been able to get back to our
Mhm.
hotels.
You traveled with your own bass,
Yes.
yeah, in a hard case.
No, in soft case. In those days, even bases were hand luggage on airplanes. Most of the planes in the United States had coat racks where people would hang their coats, and I could just tie the bass up to the coat rack just like in standing position, with a web strap that I carried with me. But then eventually they did away with the coat racks and put everything in the overhead luggage compartments.
Which is not that easy with the bass, yeah.
The bass won't fit in there, so then I would have to put it in the bulkhead seat, which had a little more leg room, and there were a couple of planes in the Canadian planes, I think, had room behind the toilets in the tail that was carpeted, but just the right shape for a bass to slide into. And so sometimes that was possible. And in some European tours, the planes had bunks for extra pilots that were unable to fly because of the hours they'd already put in, but they had to get back to some other city. So they would let them sleep in these bunks, and a bass would fit right in there very well.
Seems like you were lucky all the time, so never a cracked bass or something like that.
No, I was very lucky. When I was traveling later on with Peter Duchin's band, I was playing Fender bass, and the airlines managed to mess up my amplifier a couple of times.
I read also that you, I think since 20 years, you're active in the Musicians Union. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, I was. Actually, when I started doing Broadway shows back in the 80s, I got interested in the politics of the union there. And, we were very unhappy with the older generation of union officers. So one year, a whole bunch of us ran for office. I was elected to the executive board, and I served on it for about 20 years. And then I disagreed with somebody that they were running for president. I decided I'd put in my time, but I still worked at the union in the checks department, and that continued until the pandemic closed the building. And so then I just retired. And I still write a column for the newspaper, but I don't have anything more to do with the union business.
Is the office right there where they have the jam session every once in a while?
Yeah, it's right on 48th Street and 8th Avenue.
Yeah, I've been there once, I think.
Yeah, that building actually back in the heyday of the recording business, when all of the recording studios were full day and night. There was a company called A&R that had a studio on 52nd Street, and they opened another one in this same building, and the ground floor was the recording studio. It's now the club room and the little stage there with a piano where people can have rehearsals and all.
Yeah. And your main thing was like to get better deals for the musicians, or what was your thing there?
Yeah, just to try to keep people from undercutting the things that we had negotiated with managements as to what the benefits and pay and hours and all of that would be, and a decent paycheck for the amount of work that you were doing. There are always some people who would like to come in and do it cheaper by paying the musicians less, So that was always a fight, and we did all right on Broadway, but the club date industry and the jazz
Freelancer, yeah.
were hard to negotiate better wages because the profit margin was so slim, you know.
Mhm. And is that Benny Goodman story we talked about, is it in your autobiography that you wrote, or
It's like
another book? Or?
a short version of the story is
Uh-huh.
in From Birdland to Broadway,
Uh-huh.
but but the one that's on my website is the whole article that I did for Japanese.
I see. And what's the secret to being healthy? And I think you're 90 something and still
I'm
full of juice.
94 now. Yeah, I'll be
94,
95 in December. Oh, the only advice I can give is don't die.
No cigarettes, no, or you do that
Well,
as well?
back in the 50s, I mean, everybody smoked when I was a kid, you know. And in the army, it was like the tobacco companies really took advantage by making cigarettes either free or very reasonable, and so everybody got a cigarette habit. I don't think I knew any soldiers that didn't smoke, and so when the Surgeon General's report came out in around 1953, I think it was, with all those pictures of lungs that were destroyed, I gave it up. I thought, I'm not going to do that to myself anymore.
Are you playing gigs these days?
Yeah, things are starting to perk up a little bit. There's a friend of mine, a drummer named Nick Schubel, who's in his 50s, who has a daughter that's just 20 who plays wonderful piano. She's been studying with some really good players. And so we have a little group that we put together sometimes that we call the Three Generations of Jazz. And
Very nice.
There's a jazz club out in New Jersey that we play once in a while, and some park concerts we've done, and some library concerts, that sort of thing. And then I have there's a Japanese friend of mine, Ryo Sasaki, a very good trumpet player, and he has a friend that plays very good guitar, and we have a steady Thursday at a restaurant in Tribeca.
Very cool.
And we occasionally play other things too.
Yeah, it's amazing. When I saw the year that you were born, I mean, it's you were around a long time. I mean, it's great to talk to someone who is almost as long as around as jazz, if you want to
Well,
put it that
when
way.
when I was still trying to be a trumpet player in the 6th grade, I was walking by my music teacher's house, and he saw me and waved me in, and he put a record on his record player and played it for me, and that was the start of my interest in jazz. I'd heard it a little bit on the radio, you know, but they didn't really. But this was Louis Armstrong's West End Blues, and he played that fantastic cadenza and then sang, and I thought, oh, that's what I want to do.
Beautiful
So
entry. Yeah.
that was my.
Well, I really appreciated the fact that you joined me here and told me a little bit about what you've been through with the music. Really loved to hear all those stories. Yeah. Thanks a lot for that.
Okay.
Yeah. Any practice habits that you are still do every day? Is there something like that in closing that you can share with us as a bass player?
Most of the practicing I do at home is on the tuba because I lose my lip if I don't play it every day. You know, with the bass, I play enough times. If I go down to my friend Nick's house at least once a week to play with his daughter and another very good Japanese piano player, Tomoko Ono, comes and plays with us sometimes, and a couple of good horn players have dropped by. So that keeps my hands in shape.
No cement anymore.
Oh no. Once in a while, somebody will give me a piece of music that has some hard fingerings to the part they've written, and I'll
Uh-huh.
take that home and work on it until I figure out the best way to play it.
Mhm. I wish you continued health, Bill, and thanks again. I wish you a lovely afternoon, and really appreciate it talking to you.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.